Today, we're tackling digital privacy, really digging into what it means for you right now.
Mhm.
We know you're probably looking for the essential information, maybe without wading through tons of text.
Exactly. Cut to the chase.
So we've distilled the crucial work of Chi, Fry, and Gray, and we've also got Henry's recent updates in here to give you a clear handle on your privacy rights, the real risks from today's tech,
Uh-huh.
the laws trying, maybe struggling, to keep pace, and some actionable steps you can actually take.
Think of it as your quick guide to getting savvy about digital privacy.
Exactly. A shortcut.
What's really interesting, I think, is that this core idea of privacy, that feeling of personal space, of control, it's now slamming right into a digital world that's fundamentally built on, well, sharing and connection.
Right. That's the conflict.
Yeah. So our discussion today will explore how those fundamental rights are being challenged and, frankly, redefined.
Okay. Let's dive right into the foundation then. Our rights and freedoms. Our sources talk about this key difference between negative and positive rights for privacy. What's the crucial distinction there?
So if you think about your everyday life, negative rights are kind of like your shield, right? They protect you from things like intrusion,
Okay.
freedom from unwarranted surveillance, having your personal space invaded, that kind of thing. It's basically the right to be left alone unless there's a really good legal reason.
So like the digital version of my home is my castle.
Precisely. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Now, positive rights, they're more about what you can actively demand.
Oh, okay.
So in the privacy context, this mostly means having control over your personal information. You have the right, within the legal rules, to decide how your data is collected, used, shared.
So it puts the onus on others.
Exactly. It puts a responsibility on others to respect the choices you make. The main point here is that privacy isn't just about being left alone. It's also about having some agency, some say, over your digital self.
That makes a lot more sense. Not just keeping people out, but having a voice in what happens. Which leads us straight to personal information. We all throw the term around. But what exactly counts? And why is consent such a minefield?
Well, essentially, personal information it's pretty much any piece of data that can identify you as an individual.
So, name, address.
Yeah, name, address, sure, but also browsing history, your location data, even stuff you might not think about. Now, the huge issue is consent. The ideal, right, is informed consent.
Informed. Key word.
Right. You understand exactly what data is being collected, precisely how it'll be used before you click agree.
Sounds simple enough, but I suspect there's a but coming.
Well, yeah. This really raises a big question. How often is our consent truly informed? The sources point to practices like invisible information gathering.
Meaning?
Meaning data is collected in the background, you don't necessarily know what's happening. And secondary use, where your info gets used for stuff you never agreed to in the first place.
Ah, okay. That's the sneaky part.
These things really undermine that sense of control we were just talking about. It's like you agree to share your contacts for one app, maybe a messaging app.
Yeah.
And then you find out later that same list ended up with some marketing company you've never even heard of.
Exactly. It feels like the rules change after you've already agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, so the digital world runs on analyzing huge amounts of data. We hear these terms. Data mining, computer matching, computer profiling. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. They're all powerful ways to analyze data mining. Think of it like digging through massive digital mountains to find hidden patterns, connections.
Right.
This is often how they build those detailed profiles of individuals, which then, fuel targeted advertising.
The ads that follow you around the internet.
That's data mining in action.
Yeah.
They're basically trying to guess what you want, sometimes before you even know it yourself.
Okay. And computer matching.
Computer matching takes it a step further. It combines data from different databases, often uses things like your social security number, maybe your name and address, to link records together.
So connecting the dots.
Precisely. Governments might use it to check benefits eligibility, maybe detect fraud. The key thing here is how bits of information that seem separate can suddenly be linked to create a much bigger picture of you.
Like a digital jigsaw puzzle of our lives, you said earlier.
Exactly. And that leads us neatly into computer profiling. This uses all that data analysis to predict your characteristics, maybe even your future behavior.
Okay, that sounds potentially problematic.
Yeah, the big worry is the potential for bias, for discrimination. Imagine being denied a loan or insurance based on some computer-generated profile that might not be accurate, or maybe it just unfairly lumps you in with a certain group.
That is a scary thought. Now, when we face these data requests, it's usually through those super long privacy policies and the choice between opt-in and opt-out. Are these really giving us meaningful control?
That's a really crucial point about how effective these things actually are. Opt-in means you have to actively say, yes, give permission for your data to be used for something specific. Generally, fewer people do that.
Right. Takes effort.
Opt-out assumes you're fine with it unless you take the step to say no. And the way these choices are phrased, how they're presented on the screen, it can really nudge you, sometimes quite subtly, towards sharing more than you perhaps intended.
Yeah, like those cookie banners everywhere. You just want to get rid of them, so you click accept all.
Exactly that. And the privacy policies themselves, I mean, they're supposed to inform you, but let's be honest, they're often so long, so full of legalese that most people just don't read them. Can't read them, practically.
So the idea of control is there, but the reality, maybe not so much.
The reality is often quite different, yeah.
Okay, so the complexities are starting to become clear, but what are the actual dangers? What are the main threats to our privacy we should really be aware of?
Our sources break these down pretty helpfully. First, you've got intentional uses of your data by institutions, maybe going beyond what you thought you signed up for.
Okay.
Then there's the risk of, unauthorized access or leaks from inside an organization, an employee snooping, maybe?
The insider threat.
Right. And of course, the one everyone thinks about, hackers, data theft.
The usual suspects.
But it's actually broader. There are also unintentional data leaks, maybe due to a software bug, human error. Stuff happens.
Right. Accidental exposure.
And crucially, our own actions play a part. Sometimes we willingly trade privacy for convenience, maybe without fully getting the long-term deal.
Or we just don't know the risk.
Or we're just unaware of the risks involved in clicking that button or sharing that photo. The main point, I think, is that threats come from lots of directions, not just, shadowy hackers.
So we're part of the picture too, sometimes without realizing it.
Yeah.
Now, technology is moving incredibly fast. How have these newer advancements created new kinds of privacy risks?
Oh, the digital age has amplified privacy risks hugely. The sheer amount of personal data now stored in massive databases, government, private companies, everywhere makes it a much richer target. And it's easier to access, easier to share.
More data, more problems.
Exactly. Plus, we have increasingly sophisticated surveillance tech, facial recognition, constant location tracking from our phones. This allows monitoring on a scale that was, frankly, unimaginable before. And the very complexity of modern software, all these interconnected systems, it just creates more cracks, more opportunities for vulnerabilities and data breaches.
Feels like we're constantly playing catch-up with the risks. Can you give us some solid examples of how these new technologies are hitting our privacy?
Sure. Search query data is a big one. Every single time you search online, those queries get collected, analyzed.
Yeah.
Now, okay, this data helps improve search results, fuels targeted ads, but it also reveals incredibly personal things about your thoughts, your interests, your worries.
Like a diary you didn't know you were writing?
Kind of, yeah. The privacy risk is huge. Who gets access? How secure is it? What about misuse or legal demands for that history? It gives a surprisingly intimate look into our minds.
It's like our search history is a window to our soul, and someone else controls the blinds.
That's a good way to put it. Then think about smartphones. They are just data vacuum cleaners.
Yeah.
Your location is constantly tracked by various apps, often without you even realizing it's happening. One study mentioned in the sources found roughly half the apps tested were sending device IDs and location data off to other companies silently. And some apps just copy your entire contact list to their servers, again, often without clear consent. That's a massive privacy issue.
Definitely.
Plus, the phones themselves are security risks. Sensitive stuff like banking details might be stored right there on the device. Lose your phone, get hacked. It's a prime target. The main takeaway is that these devices we carry everywhere are now huge data collection hubs.
That's pretty sobering. It's like carrying a tracker and a personal vault combined. Our sources give a really good summary of these risks. Let's just hit some key points to make sure we're all on the same page.
Okay. What's crucial is understanding that pretty much everything we do online leaves a digital trace, a footprint.
Right.
And the sheer scale of data being collected about us is just staggering, including really sensitive stuff. Often we're just not aware of how much is being gathered.
Ignorance isn't bliss here.
No. And the complexity of software creates vulnerabilities, leads to leaks. Then there's data aggregation that's pulling together different bits of data.
Jigsaw puzzle again.
Right. To build these incredibly detailed profiles, even data that's supposed to be anonymous can sometimes be traced back to you re-identified.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget all the publicly available info, social media, public records that can be scraped and used maliciously. Data gets repurposed without consent. Governments access data held by companies, sometimes without you knowing.
And it sticks around forever, right?
Yeah, that's another big one, the permanence of online information. And ultimately, we have pretty limited control over our own digital footprint. We're often just relying on companies to protect it for us.
It really paints a stark picture. So, with all these traps and dangers, are there any basic principles that can guide us towards better privacy?
Yes, definitely. This is where the Fair Information Principles, or FIPS, come in. They're like a set of core guidelines for handling data responsibly.
Okay.
First is notice, or awareness, basically. You should be told what data is collected and how it's used.
Makes sense.
Then data minimization, only collect what's absolutely necessary for a specific reason. The idea is less data collected means less risk, right?
If they don't have it, they can't lose it or misuse it.
Exactly. Opt-out gives you the right to say no to certain data collection or uses. Data retention means keeping data only as long as needed.
Get rid of it eventually.
Right. Data accuracy is important. Keeping info correct, letting you fix errors. Data security needing strong measures to protect the data. And finally, there are principles about how law enforcement requests are handled, respecting rights while allowing for legal processes.
These sound like common sense, really, but you get the feeling they aren't always followed.
That's often the case, yeah.
Now, consent keeps popping up. It's not always black and white, is it? Like sharing photos online.
No, it's really not. Take sharing a photo or a video of someone else online. When should you actually ask for permission? It kind of depends, doesn't it?
On the context.
Yeah, the context, public place, private moment, what's the potential impact on that person, what's your relationship? The line between just being polite and having a real ethical duty can be surprisingly fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
And now with things like deepfakes, digital manipulation getting so sophisticated, consent becomes even more complicated, and the potential for harm just skyrockets.
It really feels like we're figuring out a whole new digital etiquette. The sources also use this analogy comparing personal info theft to stealing physical stuff, like a car. What's the takeaway there?
The analogy is useful because it highlights that basic risk of unauthorized access and use, whether it's your car or your data.
Right. Theft is theft.
And it underlines the need for security, physical or digital locks. But, and this is crucial, there's a big difference. Digital data is intangible. It can be copied endlessly without the original vanishing.
Ah, yeah.
And the consequences of data theft, identity theft, financial fraud can be much, much wider and last way longer than losing, say, your stereo. The impact can just spread so much further.
So digital theft has a much bigger potential blast radius.
Got it. On a slightly different note, what about the privacy debate around prepaid mobile phones requiring ID to buy them?
Ah, yes. That's a classic privacy versus security clash.
Yeah.
On one side, people argue requiring ID helps law enforcement track criminals, stops anonymous communication being used for bad stuff. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, I can see the argument. But on the other side, huge privacy concerns. It infringes on the right to be anonymous, could lead to more government surveillance, there's worry about misuse, and also that it hits lower income folks harder, people who rely on prepaid phones.
So valid points on both sides. No easy answer.
Definitely not. It's a real balancing act.
Okay, let's pivot a bit and talk about the law. How is it trying to keep up with all this tech? Let's focus on the Fourth Amendment in the U.S. Quick refresher, what's the core idea?
Right. The Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, it's absolutely fundamental. It protects us, our homes, our papers, our effects from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government.
Unreasonable being the key word.
Exactly. And it says warrants are needed based on probable cause supported by oath, and they have to specifically describe what's being searched or seized. The core idea is protection from the government just barging in without justification.
So the bedrock of our privacy against government intrusion. But how does this amendment, written centuries ago, handle modern digital tech?
Yeah, that's where it gets really tricky. The Fourth Amendment talks about papers and effects, physical things. Now, so much of our personal info is digital, often stored on servers owned by, Google or Facebook or whoever, third parties.
Right, not in our house.
So does the Fourth Amendment protection reach that far? Does it cover data held by someone else? That's a huge question. And then you have tech like thermal imaging, drones. They allow surveillance without physical entry. Does that count as a search?
It stretches the old definitions.
It really does. And think about phones. It's so easy to pull vast amounts of data off them, even deleted stuff. Should that always need a warrant? It raises big concerns.
It definitely feels like the traditional idea of a search is getting blurry. Our sources mention some key Supreme Court cases. Let's start way back with Olmstead v. United States in 1928. What happened there?
Olmstead. Yeah, the court took a very literal view back then. They said wiretapping phone lines outside someone's property wasn't a search because there was no physical trespass. No one actually went into the house.
So, no physical intrusion, no Fourth Amendment issue.
Basically, yes, which meant the government could wiretap without a warrant. A big win for law enforcement then, but very worrying for privacy advocates, even back in the 20s. The core idea was a super narrow view of search.
Sounds like it prioritized police tools over privacy. But that changed with Katz v. United States in 1967, didn't it?
Yes, Katz was a game changer, landmark case. Law enforcement put a listening device on the outside of a public phone booth.
Oh,
The court flipped its thinking from Olmstead. They said the Fourth Amendment protects people, not just physical places. Crucially, they introduced this idea of a reasonable expectation of privacy.
reasonable expectation.
Right. If you reasonably expect privacy in a situation, even a public phone booth,
Yeah.
then government intrusion without a warrant is a search. Big shift. But, and this is a really important but, there's the third-party doctrine that came out of later cases. Generally, it says if you voluntarily share information with a third party like your bank or your email provider, you lose some of that expectation of privacy.
So even if I think my emails are private because I gave them to Google, legally, maybe not so much.
That's the implication, and it has huge consequences for our digital lives today. It really limits the scope of Katz in the online world.
Wow. Okay. What about Kylo v. United States in 2001? That involved thermal imaging, right?
Yes, Kylo.
Right.
Police used a thermal imager from the street to scan someone's house for heat lamps, suspecting marijuana growth.
Okay.
The court ruled that using technology that's not in general public use to get information from inside a home, information you couldn't otherwise get without physically entering, is a search and needs a warrant.
So a win for privacy against high-tech snooping.
It was, yeah. It recognized that new tech could be just as intrusive as a physical search. But the court added a caveat. They suggested that as technology becomes more common, maybe its warrantless use could become acceptable.
That's a bit worrying. As tech gets better and cheaper, our protection might shrink.
That's the potential implication, yes.
Hmm.
It ties the level of protection to how common the surveillance tech is.
Okay. Now, what about the plain view doctrine? Seeing illegal stuff in plain sight. How does that work with computers and phones?
Yeah, plain view allows police to seize evidence without a warrant if they see it openly during a lawful observation. Simple enough with, say, drugs on a car seat.
Right.
But apply that to a computer screen. What's in plain view might just be an icon, but clicking it could open up access to thousands of private files. It's not straightforward.
It's like the screen is the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. And courts have actually disagreed on this. Like, can police search an arrested person's phone without a warrant based on plain view? There's no clear, consistent answer yet. It shows how hard it is to fit old rules to new tech.
It really is like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Now, video surveillance, face recognition, they're everywhere in public spaces now. How do we weigh the security benefits against the privacy cost?
Oh, this is a massive debate. A really tough ethical tightrope. On one hand, yeah, potential security benefits monitoring crowds, maybe spotting threats. They used face scanning at the Super Bowl years ago, remember, without asking everyone first.
I do remember that causing a stir.
Right. But the privacy concerns are huge. Mass surveillance can create a chilling effect. People might self-censor if they feel watched. There's a real risk of abuse, misuse of the data, and often a lack of transparency about who's collecting it, how long they keep it, who sees it.
And does it even work that well?
That's another part of the debate. Is it really more effective than, say, just having more police officers around? The tension is fundamentally between that desire for public safety and our individual liberty, our right to move around without being constantly tracked and identified.
And it's not just about being watched now, is it? It's the data trail.
Absolutely. The bigger questions are about consent. Should we be told when our face is being scanned? Who gets this biometric data? How long is it kept? We've already seen cases where surveillance operators misused their access. And you see legislative attempts popping up, like that proposed bill in New York about checking drivers' phones after crashes. It's all part of this ongoing struggle to draw lines around new tech, balancing safety and privacy.
It feels like we're constantly negotiating these boundaries without a clear map. The FBI versus Apple case after the San Bernardino shooting really highlighted this tension over device access, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That case put the conflict right out in the open. The government needed access for critical investigation, clashing directly with individual privacy rights and Apple's commitment to strong encryption for all its users.
A rock at a hard place.
Completely. It showed just how hard it is, legally and technically, to balance these competing needs. Can you create a backdoor for law enforcement without weakening security for everyone? That was the
Yeah.
core technical problem.
And it's not just about getting into devices. What about surveillance that doesn't even need physical access? Maybe not even a traditional warrant.
Yeah, we're seeing more creative surveillance methods. The example in the sources about federal agents putting a camera on a utility pole to watch a farm for months without a warrant.
Because they argued it was visible from the road.
Exactly. Their argument was no reasonable expectation of privacy if someone could see it from a public road. This throws up big legal questions. What is a reasonable expectation of privacy in public view, especially when technology gives you superhuman vision, effectively?
Technology is really blurring those lines.
It absolutely is.
So what about drones? Flying cameras? Should they need warrants? Does it matter if it's over your backyard versus, say, a public park?
Drones add another complex layer. Whether a warrant's needed probably depends on things like how high is it flying? What tech does it have? Just a basic camera or high-res zoom thermal imaging? And crucially, where is it? Hovering over your private backyard feels very different from flying over a busy street.
And if it has facial recognition software.
That would almost certainly strengthen the case for needing a warrant because the potential for intrusive, targeted surveillance goes way up. It's definitely an area where the law is still racing to catch up.
Seems like a common theme. Finally, on government data use, there's that example of the Dutch navigation company's data being used by police for traffic camera placement. Was that a privacy violation?
That case is interesting because it shows the complex data flows between private companies and government. Police used aggregated, maybe anonymized, location data to figure out speeding hotspots.
For public safety, arguably.
Right, the goal was traffic safety. But the users, and maybe even the company initially, likely had no idea their driving data would be used that way by the police. So was it a violation? It raises questions about transparency, consent, and the boundaries for government accessing privately held data, even for a good cause. Did users anticipate the secondary use? Probably not.
It's a reminder that our data can travel in unexpected ways. Okay, let's shift focus now to the business and social sectors. Data is obviously huge business. Let's start with the cloud. Super convenient, right? But what's the privacy trade-off?
Yeah, cloud storage is incredibly convenient. Access your stuff anywhere, scales easily, huge benefits. But the trade-off is security and control. Your data is now sitting on someone else's server.
Right, not your hard drive.
Exactly. So it's a target for hackers, potential breaches at the provider level, maybe even unauthorized access by the provider's employees. You're trusting that third-party security. Plus, where are those servers physically located? Different countries have different privacy laws, so you're balancing that ease of access against a potential loss of direct control and maybe increased security risks.
It's like leaving your files in someone else's office, convenient, but you hope they have good locks and trustworthy staff. What about location tracking? GPS is in everything. Privacy issues there.
Oh, big time. GPS is super useful, obviously, but it enables almost constant tracking. Our movements can be monitored by apps, by services, often without us fully realizing the extent of it.
And that data gets shared.
Frequently, yeah.
Yeah.
Shared with advertisers, data brokers, building up detailed profiles of our habits, where we go when. This raises worries about surveillance, stalking, just the general erosion of feeling anonymous, even in public. While location services are handy, you really need to be aware of your phone's settings, which apps have access, and how that data might be used. The convenience often comes at the price of your location privacy.
So that Helpful Map app might be mapping more than just your route and using location tracking for kids' parental tracking tools. That brings up unique ethical questions, right?
Absolutely. On one hand, parents want peace of mind, safety in emergencies, totally understandable benefits.
Yep.
But on the other hand, you've got major concerns about invading a child's privacy, potentially damaging trust, over-monitoring. Then there are data security risks with these tracking devices too. And what are the actual legal rights of minors regarding their own data and privacy? It's a really delicate balance between safety and respecting a child's growing autonomy. Open communication is probably key.
Fostering trust, not just tracking dots on a map.
Okay, an interesting concept gaining traction is the right to be forgotten. What's that about?
The right to be forgotten. It's basically the idea that individuals should be able, under certain conditions, to ask for their personal information to be removed from public view, especially online. Think outdated info, irrelevant stuff, inaccuracies.
So, cleaning up your digital past? Kind of. It's seen as both a negative right, freedom from having old stuff constantly surface, and a positive right, the ability to demand removal. But it clashes pretty significantly with freedom of expression and the public's right to access information. Where do you draw the line? The EU's GDPR includes this right, but figuring out how it works globally, balancing it with free speech, it's really complex.
A fascinating clash of values. Turning back to government systems, they hold tons of data on us. What are the main privacy worries there?
Well, government databases are essential for running things, security services, but they hold so much sensitive information. The potential for misuse or breaches is significant. Oversight bodies like the GAO in the US are meant to monitor privacy policies.
But is the oversight effective?
That's the question. Legally, accessing data usually needs warrants, probable cause, but there are always concerns about phishing expeditions, broad searches, or the scope of surveillance. Using data mining and computer matching for counterterrorism or crime fighting has potential benefits, but also risks of loose errors, false positives hitting innocent people. Robust oversight and clear rules are just crucial.
It's that constant tension between government power and individual rights.
What about public records? They're meant to be public, but does that create privacy risks?
Yes, it does. Public records are vital for transparency, accountability. You need to see property records, court filings, etc.
Sure.
But that accessibility makes them a goldmine for identity thieves. The sources mention things like fraudsters using public records to fake property sales. Making these records easily searchable online amplifies the risk. So the challenge is balancing that transparency with privacy protection, maybe redacting certain details, limiting bulk online access, having strong security on the databases themselves. Ensuring openness doesn't mean vulnerability. Our sources rate some good questions we should ask about government data. What are they?
Yeah, as citizens, we should be asking, what specific data does the government collect on us? How do they collect it? How is it secured? Who gets access and under what rules? How long is it kept? And importantly, what happens if there's a breach or misuse? Who is accountable? We need ongoing scrutiny.
Critical questions for trust and accountability. Putting public records online offers convenience, but as you said, it magnifies risks.
Definitely. Online access is efficient, no doubt, but it lowers the barrier for fraudsters and others looking to exploit personal information found in those records. Thinking about alternative access, maybe requiring some ID or justification for certain sensitive records, even if they are public, along with better security for online portals, might be necessary.
Finding that secure middle ground in the digital age. So controlling who gets access to government databases is key. What goes into that?
Establishing strong access controls means, first, clearly defining who needs access to what data for their job. Not everyone needs access to everything.
Right. Role-based access.
Exactly. Then, implementing strong authentication, not just simple passwords and authorization. Regular security audits are vital to check for weaknesses or inappropriate access. And you need clear procedures and accountability if something does go wrong, like a breach or an employee snooping. It's about layers of security and clear responsibility.
Trust in the system and the people running it. Okay, finally in this section, let's tackle the big one. A national ID system. What are the arguments for and against from a privacy angle?
This is a perennial debate. Proponents argue a national ID could boost security harder to fake identity, maybe helps track criminals or terrorists. Could also be convenient one card for many things, streamlining services.
The pro side sounds like security and efficiency.
Pretty much. But the con side raises major privacy red flags. The potential for increased government surveillance, a centralized database tracking everyone, the risk of abuse discrimination, misuse of data, the erosion of civil liberties, feeling like you're constantly being monitored by the state.
And the U.S. already kind of has one, right? With
Yep.
Social Security numbers?
In practice, yes. The Social Security number has become a de facto national identifier, even though it wasn't intended for that. And the REAL ID Act pushed federal standards for driver's licenses, making them more like a national ID, which also sparked a lot of debate about these very trade-offs. Estonia is often cited as an example of a digital ID system working well, but the U.S. context and culture raise different concerns.
A debate with deep historical roots and huge implications. Okay, after looking at all those risks and challenges, let's talk solutions. What can we actually do to protect our privacy?
Right, let's get practical. Thankfully, we're not powerless. There are privacy-enhancing technologies, or PETs, things like encryption.
Scrambling the data.
Exactly, making it unreadable without the key. End-to-end encryption is a great example, ensuring only the sender and receiver can read messages. Public key cryptography lets you communicate securely without sharing a secret key, first vital for online banking, secure email.
What else?
Anonymization tools. These try to strip out or mask identifying information from data so it can be analyzed without revealing who's who. And privacy-focused browsers and search engines like DuckDuckGo or Tor are designed specifically to minimize tracking and data collection. Technology itself can be part of the solution.
So tech can bite, but it can also protect. What about businesses? What's their role?
Businesses have a huge responsibility. They need robust data protection measures, strong access controls, minimizing the data they collect in the first place, regular security checks.
The fair information principles again?
Exactly. Transparency is key, clear, understandable privacy policies, not pages of jargon, and empowering users with real control, easy ways to opt out, access their data, request deletion. It's about building trust, really. It's an ethical duty, and increasingly, a legal one, too.
Building trust, not just collecting data. Now, encryption is vital. What's the backstory there, legally speaking?
Oh, the history of encryption is fascinatingly tied up with government concerns. Back in the 1990s, the U.S. government heavily restricted the export of strong encryption software.
Why?
National security concerns. They worried strong encryption would hinder intelligence gathering and law enforcement. This led to the crypto wars, a big debate about privacy versus security. There were even legal challenges arguing that software content is speech protected by the First Amendment.
So free speech versus national security.
Essentially, yeah. Those export controls were eventually loosened, but that fundamental tension, strong encryption for privacy versus government access for security, it's still a major issue today. Think about the FBI versus Apple case again.
It's a recurring theme. Let's look at privacy rights in law. How did this idea even develop? It wasn't always a distinct right, was it?
No, not really. Early on, courts often handled privacy-type issues through older legal ideas like property rights trespassing or contract law breach of confidence. The big moment was that 1890 Harvard Law Review article by Warren and Brandeis. They explicitly argued for a separate, distinct right to be let alone. That really laid the groundwork for modern privacy law in the U.S.
So they carved it out as its own concept.
Yes. Though later thinkers, like Judith Jarvis Thompson, challenged that a bit, arguing maybe privacy violations are just violations of other rights we already recognize. But the Warren and Brandeis idea was hugely influential.
So the legal footing evolved over time. What's the general legal framework now for protecting privacy?
It's complex, a mix of things. The question of who actually owns your personal data is still debated, but laws like the EU's GDPR give individuals strong rights over their data access, correction, deletion.
Okay.
Privacy policies in terms of service act as contracts between you and the company. If they violate their own policy, that can be a breach of contract.
So those long documents matter legally.
They do. And then you have specific government regulations, broad ones like GDPR, or sector-specific ones in the U.S. like HIPAA for health information, COPPA for kids online. It's a patchwork, really, not one single law covering everything.
A mix of rights, contracts, and regulations. We talked about needing regulation, but there's also the free market view. How does that approach privacy?
The free market view basically emphasizes individual choice and voluntary agreements. The idea is you choose what data to share, companies compete, and if consumers value privacy, the market will provide it.
So let the market decide.
Essentially, they tend to favor contracts as the main tool and are generally critical of too much government regulation, arguing it stifles innovation, adds costs, and isn't necessary if consumers can just choose privacy protective services.
Okay. And the counterargument, the consumer protection view.
The consumer protection view stresses the power imbalance. They argue individuals often don't have the time, knowledge, or real choice to negotiate effectively with big companies about data.
Information asymmetry.
Exactly. And the consequences of breaches or misuse are serious and fall heavily on the individual. So, they argue, you need strong government regulations to set baseline protections, ensure fairness, and hold companies accountable, because the market alone won't adequately protect consumers from harm or exploitation.
Two fundamentally different philosophies on how to handle this. How might they view something like errors in credit reports differently?
Good example. The free market view might say it's your responsibility to monitor your report and dispute errors, and competition should push bureaus towards accuracy. Less regulation needed.
Okay.
The consumer protection view would highlight the devastating impact errors can have denied loans, jobs, housing, and argue for strong regulations like the Fair Credit Reporting Act, placing clear legal duties on the bureaus to ensure accuracy and provide easy ways for you to fix mistakes. It's about where the responsibility lies.
A clear difference in where the burden falls. And when we talk privacy, who exactly is the consumer?
That's a great question, actually. Usually, we think of the consumer as us, the individual whose data is being collected.
Right. But from the perspective of the data economy, the consumer might also be the advertiser buying access to our profiles, or the data broker buying and selling the information itself. Our data is the product being consumed by others.
That shifts the perspective quite a bit.
Hmm.
Go slightly different angle. Is freedom from the inappropriate judgment of others a good definition of privacy?
It captured an important aspect, definitely that social, psychological side, wanting control over how people see us.
Sure. Reputation.
Yeah. But in today's digital world, it feels incomplete. It doesn't really address things like automated decision-making based on data, mass surveillance where no human is judging you directly, or the risks from data breaches that harm you financially or otherwise, even without social judgment. Definitions today often focus more on control over information, who collects it, how it's used, who it's shared with.
Broader definitions seem necessary now. Okay, here's a provocative comparison. Microchipping pets versus kids. What privacy issues jump out with children? Whoa, yeah. Comparing those really sharpens the ethical focus. We generally accept chipping pets for safety, finding them if lost.
Right, standard practice.
But applying that to children, it immediately brings up huge privacy alarms. Constant tracking, potential for surveillance by parents or others, data security of that chip, misuse, and fundamental questions about a child's autonomy, their right to privacy as they grow. Consent. Can a child consent? Can a parent consent for them to this? The potential for abuse seems much higher. It forces a really tough conversation about safety versus freedom and bodily integrity.
A very sensitive line to walk. Let's talk DNA databases. A children's hospital wants to collect anonymous DNA for research. Potential benefits versus risks.
Huge potential benefits, for sure. Analyzing large-scale genetic data, even anonymized, could unlock understanding of childhood diseases, lead to new treatments, personalized medicine, massive research value.
But the risks?
Even with anonymization, genetic data is uniquely identifiable. There's always a risk, maybe small but real, of re-identification, especially as analysis techniques get better or if it's combined with other data.
Right.
Then there are consent issues. Again, can children truly give informed consent? What about future uses of that data? Could it be misused by insurers, employers down the line if it's somehow linked back? Data security is paramount. A breach of genetic data would be catastrophic. It's balancing incredible potential good against very serious privacy and ethical risks.
A high-stakes balancing act. Lastly, this common trade. Free internet services for tracking our activity. Google, Facebook. Is that a fair trade?
The billion-dollar question of the internet economy. Is it fair? Arguments for fair often say. You get valuable services for free, you choose to use them. There are alternatives, though often with similar models, and they tell you what they're doing in the privacy policy, even if no one reads it.
You get what you pay for argument, kind of.
Sort of. But arguments against fair highlight the power imbalance. Users often don't understand the true value or extent of the data they're giving up. There aren't always meaningful private alternatives for essential services, and this model can exploit vulnerable users, offering discounts for data, for example.
So exploitation versus voluntary exchange.
Exactly. Whether it's fair is really subjective. It depends on how much you value the service versus your privacy and how much you actually know about the deal you're making. The hidden cost of free is often our data.
A trade many of us make daily, maybe without fully thinking it through. Okay, let's briefly compare EU versus US privacy rules. What's the main difference?
The big picture is the EU is generally much stricter and more comprehensive. Their GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, sets strong rules across the board, gives individuals lots of rights over their data, and heavily restricts sending data outside the EU unless the other country has adequate protection.
And the
The US is more patchwork. No single federal law like GDPR. Instead, you have laws for specific sectors: high pay for health, call for kids, GLBA for finance. There was the Safe Harbor Agreement to let data flow to the U.S., but the EU court struck it down partly due to concerns about U.S. surveillance. Many argue the U.S. is lagging behind Europe on overall privacy protection.
A definite difference in approach. What about laws around wiretapping and email protection in the U.S.?
That's evolved over time. Early laws focused on phone calls, generally needing court orders. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act, ECPA, in 1986 extended similar protections to emails and other electronic communications usually need a warrant to get the content.
Usually.
Yeah, but remember that third-party doctrine. It creates exceptions, especially for older emails stored by providers. And getting metadata, who called whom, email headers, often called pen register data, generally requires a lower legal standard than getting the actual conversation content. Different rules for content versus metadata.
Different standards for the envelope versus the letter inside. What about CELEA, Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act?
CELEA essentially requires telecom companies, and now broadband providers too, to build technical capabilities into their systems so they can comply with lawful wiretap orders.
Build in the intercept capability.
Right. The goal is to make sure law enforcement can conduct surveillance when they have a warrant, even as technology changes. But privacy advocates worry it creates built-in surveillance infrastructure, potential backdoors, maybe even weakens overall security by mandating certain designs.
Enabling law enforcement versus safeguarding privacy and security, that tension again. And finally, the NSA and its oversight.
The NSA's foreign intelligence surveillance operates under FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. This sets up rules and oversight, including a special secret court, the FISC, to approve warrants.
But it's been controversial.
Hugely, especially programs revealed by Edward Snowden involving bulk collection of phone records or internet data. There's intense debate about whether the oversight is strong enough, transparent enough, and whether the balance struck between national security and individual privacy is the right one. It's a very contentious area.
Balancing security and liberty on a massive scale.
Yeah.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key things our listeners should take away from all this?
I think the main thing is that digital privacy is incredibly complex. It's constantly changing with technology, and it touches everything from our basic rights to intricate laws. The fair information principles give us a good framework, but putting them into practice is the real challenge. That balance between security and privacy comes up again and again in so many different contexts, and different places are tackling it differently. Ultimately, protecting yourself requires being aware, taking proactive steps, demanding responsible practices from businesses, and pushing for effective legal oversight. It's a shared responsibility.
It really is. It requires ongoing vigilance from all of us. And just to leave you with something to think about, as artificial intelligence gets woven ever deeper into our daily lives, how might these AI systems begin to blur the lines of privacy even further, maybe in ways we haven't even conceived of yet? What new challenges will that bring? It's definitely something to keep pondering as we navigate this evolving digital world. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.